Remember when $1 could feed a family for days? When our grandparents faced the harsh winters of the Depression era, they turned simple ingredients into filling meals that kept hunger at bay. Today we're exploring 25 resourceful winter lunches that sustained generations through the toughest times. Let's start with navy bean soup. This wasn't just any soup. It was the backbone of winter survival for millions of families. A pound of dried navy beans cost just 5 cents in 1935, about 90 cents in today's money. Those small white beans would soak overnight, then simmer for hours with whatever onion might be available. If you were lucky, there'd be a ham bone from Sunday's dinner, saved and rewrapped in newspaper specifically for this purpose. The bone would release its marrow and bits of clinging meat into the pot, transforming plain beans into something almost luxurious. Families would start this soup before dawn, letting it bubble on the back of the wood stove all morning. By noon, those beans had broken down into a thick, creamy base that stuck to your ribs. One pot could feed a family of 6 for 2 days, making it stretch even further with day-old bread for dipping. The government actually promoted navy bean soup through relief programs, distributing recipe cards that showed how to make it with just beans, water, and salt when times were especially lean. That's right, sometimes there wasn't even an onion to spare. Split pea soup. Green or yellow split peas were another Depression staple that turned pennies into sustenance. Unlike whole peas that took forever to cook, split peas broke down quickly into that familiar thick texture we still know today. A pound bag cost about 3 cents and could make enough soup to last a week. Housewives would save every vegetable scrap, carrot tops, celery leaves, onion skins, in a pot for making stock. Nothing was wasted. The split peas would go in with whatever root vegetables could be spared, usually just a single carrot and half an onion, diced small to spread the flavor around. Some families had a soup bone that traveled from pot to pot, a ham hock that had been boiled so many times it was more suggestion than substance. The soup cooked down into something so thick you could stand a spoon in it. Children who grew up on the soup remember how it would form a skin on top as it cooled, which their mothers insisted was the most nutritious part. Whether that was true or just another way to make sure nothing got thrown away, it worked. Many elderly folks today still can't eat split pea soup without remembering those lean winters, the smell filling cramped kitchens while snow piled against the windows. Lentil soup. Lentils were the unsung heroes of Depression cooking because they didn't need soaking and cooked in just 30 minutes, crucial when fuel was precious. At 2 cents a pound, red lentils were cheaper than split peas and packed with protein. Immigrant families from Mediterranean and Middle Eastern backgrounds already knew their value, but the Depression taught everyone else. The basic recipe was devastatingly simple: lentils, water, 1 onion, and salt. If you had it, a tablespoon of bacon grease or oil made all the difference. Some families added a single potato, cubed tiny to make it seem like more. The lentils would break down into a porridge-like consistency that filled empty bellies fast. What made this soup special was how it could be dressed up with literally anything: wilted greens from the garden, a lone carrot, even dandelion leaves picked from the yard. Church charity cookbooks from the era show dozens of variations, each one trying to make those 2 cents of lentils taste different from yesterday's batch. Cabbage soup. They called it shchi in Russian neighborhoods, kapustnica in Polish homes. But every culture had their version because cabbage was the ultimate survival vegetable. It kept for months in root cellars, actually improving in flavor after frost, and 1 head could make soup for 8 people. During the worst winters of the 1930s, when fresh vegetables disappeared entirely, cabbage soup kept families alive. The base was always the same: shred half a head of cabbage and cook it down with onions until it was sweet and soft. Add water or that carefully saved vegetable stock, then whatever you had, potatoes, carrots, turnips. The magic was in the long, slow cooking, 3 hours minimum until the cabbage melted into silk. Some families added a tablespoon of vinegar or sauerkraut juice for tang. Others stirred in a spoonful of paprika if they had Hungarian or German roots. The smell would permeate entire tenement buildings, each apartment adding their own twist to the same basic pot. Vegetable barley soup. Pearl barley was so cheap that feed stores sold it for human consumption during the Depression, right alongside the chicken feed. At a penny per pound, it was half the price of rice and more filling. That little bit of barley would swell up to 3 times its size, turning thin broth into something substantial. Mothers discovered that a quarter cup of barley could thicken enough soup for the whole family. The standard recipe used whatever root vegetables were cheapest, usually turnips, rutabagas, and potatoes, all diced to the size of the barley so every spoonful had variety. The barley released starch as it cooked, creating a naturally creamy texture without any dairy. It took about an hour of simmering, during which time frugal cooks would add vegetable trimmings tied in cheesecloth to boost flavor, removing them before serving. Some families kept a perpetual pot going, adding more barley and vegetables each day, never letting it fully empty. Veterans of the era say barley soup was what they missed most during the war. That specific texture and nutty flavor meant home and safety when everything else was uncertain. Mulligan stew. Mulligan stew wasn't just food, it was community. In hobo camps and Hoovervilles, everyone contributed whatever they could find to one big pot. Someone might have an onion, another person carrots, someone else a handful of beans. Together, it became a meal. The name supposedly came from the Irish surname, though nobody knew for sure. What everyone did know was the unwritten rules. You contributed what you could, even if it was just wood for the fire or water from the well. The base was usually potatoes and onions, the most common vegetables that could withstand rough handling and travel. Everything else was variable: canned corn, lima beans, cabbage, turnips. If someone managed to trap a rabbit or catch some fish, that went in too. The stew cooked in whatever was available: tin cans, old pots, even clean paint buckets. It wasn't pretty, but it kept people alive. The tradition spread beyond the camps to urban neighborhoods where families would pool resources for Sunday dinner, each apartment contributing something to create one substantial meal everyone could share: beans and cornbread. In Appalachian communities, they called them soup beans, but the combination of pinto beans and cornbread was universal across the South and Midwest. A pound of dried pintos cost 4 cents and could feed a family for 3 days. The beans went on the stove early morning, seasoned with nothing but salt and maybe a ham bone that had been used so many times it was practically a family heirloom. By noon, those beans had turned creamy, their cooking liquid thick as gravy. The cornbread was equally economical: cornmeal, salt, baking powder, and water if there was no milk. Baked in a cast iron skillet greased with bacon drippings, it came out crusty and golden. The ritual of eating was specific. You crumbled the cornbread right into your bowl of beans, letting it soak up that rich pot liquor. Some families added chopped onions on top, others a splash of vinegar or hot sauce if they had it. This meal was so fundamental to survival that decades later, people who'd eaten it daily during the Depression still craved it as comfort food. Many restaurants today serve fancy versions for $20 a plate, but nothing matches the original born of necessity: pot liquor and cornbread. Most people today don't even know what pot liquor is, but during the Depression, it was liquid gold. When you boiled greens, collards, turnips, mustard, the water turned into a nutrient-rich broth that families couldn't afford to waste. That green-tinged liquid contained more vitamins than the greens themselves. Mothers would boil a big mess of greens with a ham bone or piece of salt. Pork then served the greens for dinner, but lunch the next day? That was pot liquor time. You'd heat up that saved liquid, maybe drop in a few more greens if you had them, and serve it in bowls with cornbread for soaking. Some folks crumbled the cornbread right in, others dunked it piece by piece. The combination of the slightly bitter, mineral-rich broth with the sweet cornbread created a complete meal. Macaroni and tomatoes. Before it became a church supper staple, macaroni and tomatoes was survival food. A pound of elbow macaroni cost 6 cents, a can of tomatoes 4 cents. Together, they could feed 6 people. The recipe couldn't be simpler. Cook the macaroni, drain it, then simmer it with the canned tomatoes until everything melded together. The secret was a spoonful of bacon grease or butter if you had it, and plenty of black pepper. Some families added a pinch of sugar to cut the acidity of the tomatoes. Others threw in whatever cheese rinds they'd saved, letting them melt into the sauce. The dish was ready in 20 minutes, crucial when you were feeding hungry children who'd walked home from school for lunch. It reheated beautifully, actually tasting better the second day when the pasta had absorbed the tomato flavor. Factory workers would pack cold macaroni and tomatoes in their lunch pails, eating it at room temperature between shifts. The combination provided enough carbohydrates and vitamin C to keep people going through hard physical labor. Even today, people in their 90s get misty-eyed remembering the specific taste of Depression-era canned tomatoes mixed with overcooked macaroni. Haluski. Eastern European immigrants brought Haluski to American steel towns, where it became the ultimate cheap lunch. Cabbage cost next to nothing. Egg noodles were made at home with just flour and eggs, and a bit of onion rounded out the meal. The total cost? Maybe 5 cents to feed 4 people. You'd slice the cabbage thin and cook it down with onions until it was brown and sweet, which could take an hour of patient stirring. Meanwhile, the egg noodles, or store-bought if you had an extra 2 cents, boiled separately. Toss them together with the caramelized cabbage. Add salt and pepper, maybe a bit of butter or bacon fat if times were good. The dish was filling beyond belief. That combination of starch and vegetable with the natural sweetness from the long-cooked cabbage satisfied in a way that belied its humble ingredients. Slovak families added cottage cheese when they could afford it. Polish families might include kielbasa ends from the butcher. But the basic version, just cabbage, onions, and noodles, sustained entire neighborhoods through the darkest years. Poor man's meal. Nobody called it gourmet, but poor man's meal filled stomachs when the cupboard was nearly bare. The formula was simple. Dice a few potatoes and an onion, fry them in whatever fat you had, and if you were lucky, add sliced hot dogs. The whole thing cost maybe 15 cents and could feed a family of 4. The potatoes went in the pan first, getting crispy edges while staying soft inside. Then came the onions, cooking down sweet and golden. The hot dog slices, when you had them, went in last, just to warm through and release their salty, smoky flavor into the vegetables. Some families added bell peppers if they grew them in the garden. Others threw in a can of corn when they had an extra nickel. But the basic version was perfect as it was. The key was cooking it in a cast iron skillet that had absorbed years of flavoring, adding depth even to these simple ingredients. Kids loved it because of the hot dogs. Parents loved it because it was cheap and filling. Eat it straight from the skillet with bread for sopping, and you had a complete meal that stuck with you through an afternoon of hard work. Fried cornmeal mush. Cornmeal mush was breakfast, but fried cornmeal mush was lunch, and what a transformation. You'd make a big pot of cornmeal porridge, pour it into a loaf pan, and let it set overnight. Come morning, that solid block could be sliced like bread and fried golden crispy in a bit of lard or bacon grease. The outside developed this incredible crust, while the inside stayed creamy. Total cost, maybe 3 cents for enough to feed 6 people. Families in the Midwest and South perfected this dish out of necessity. Some served it with sorghum syrup or molasses for a sweet lunch. Others went savory, topping the fried slices with beans or creamed vegetables. The really clever cooks would make extra thick mush, adding a bit of meat drippings or finely chopped onions before it's set, creating a sort of cornmeal scrapple. You could eat it with your hands like a sandwich, perfect for workers who only had a few minutes for lunch. Potato cakes. Yesterday's leftover mashed potatoes weren't leftovers, they were tomorrow's lunch. Mixed with a bit of flour and maybe an egg if you had it, those cold mashed potatoes transformed into golden crispy cakes that made everyone forget they were eating leftovers. The technique was pure kitchen economics. Never waste anything that could become another meal. You'd take about 2 cups of cold mashed potatoes, add just enough flour to bind them, maybe throw in some chopped onions or whatever herbs grew wild in the yard. Form them into patties and fry them in the least amount of fat possible. Every drop was precious. The outside got magnificently crispy, while the inside stayed fluffy. Served with applesauce, sour cream, or just salt and pepper, they were genuinely delicious. Some families added tiny pieces of leftover meat, creating a sort of potato croquette. Others mixed in sauerkraut for a German twist. The Irish families knew them as boxty. The Jewish families called them latkes. But everyone made some version because potatoes were cheap, filling, and versatile. Bubble and squeak. The British had been making bubble and squeak for generations, but the Depression gave this leftover dish new life in American kitchens. The name came from the sound it made frying, all that bubbling and squeaking in the pan. You'd take Sunday's leftover mashed potatoes and whatever cooked cabbage or Brussels sprouts remained, mash them together, and fry the whole thing into a magnificent crispy cake. The transformation was remarkable. Those sad, cold leftovers became something people actually craved. The key was getting the pan really hot and not stirring too much, letting that beautiful crust develop. Some families added leftover carrots, turnips, or peas. Others threw in bits of leftover meat, though that was rare. The dish was essentially free, since you were using what would otherwise be thrown away. One elderly woman recalled that her mother would deliberately make extra vegetables on Sunday just to ensure there'd be bubble and squeak for Monday's lunch. It became such a favorite that even after the Depression ended, families kept making it. The combination of crispy edges and soft interior, the melding of potato and cabbage flavors, created something greater than its humble parts: onion soup. French onion soup was for fancy restaurants, but plain onion soup was for survival. Onions kept well cost almost nothing, and when cooked long enough, developed a sweetness that made you forget you were basically eating onion water. During the Depression, when onions sold for 2 cents a pound, this soup saved lives. You'd slice 3 or 4 onions paper thin. The more surface area, the more flavor you'd extract. Then came the patience, cooking those onions for at least an hour, stirring occasionally until they turned deep brown and sweet. Add water, not stock, because who had stock? And simmer another hour. Season with salt, pepper, maybe a bay leaf if you were lucky. The result was surprisingly rich, with a complex flavor that belied its simple ingredients. The natural sugars in the onions provided energy, and the hot liquid filled empty stomachs. Sardines on toast. Canned sardines were the unsung protein heroes of the Depression. At 5 cents a can, they provided more nutrition per penny than almost any other food. On toast, made from day-old bread that bakeries sold for almost nothing, they became a respectable lunch. The oil from the sardines soaked into the toast, adding calories and flavor that plain bread couldn't provide. You'd mash the sardines with a fork, maybe add a squeeze of lemon if you had it, or a dash of vinegar. Spread on toast and topped with thin slices of onion, it was actually delicious. The bones in the sardines, soft enough to eat, provided crucial calcium that growing children needed. Some families mixed the sardines with a bit of mustard or pickle relish to stretch them further. Others added sliced hard-boiled eggs when the chickens were laying. The combination of omega-3 fatty acids, protein, and whole grains made this one of the most nutritionally complete Depression meals, though nobody thought about it that way at the time. They just knew it was cheap, filling, and didn't require cooking beyond toasting bread. Spam fritters. When Spam hit the market in 1937, it was revolutionary. Meat that didn't need refrigeration and cost just 25 cents a can. Sliced and battered, then fried into fritters. One can could make lunch for 6 people. The batter was simple: flour, water, or milk if you had it, maybe an egg, and whatever seasonings you could spare. Each slice of Spam got a thick coating, then went into hot fat until golden and crispy. The contrast of crunchy exterior and salty, soft interior was genuinely satisfying. Mothers would make extra batter, dropping spoonfuls into the hot oil to make hush puppies that used up every bit of the mixture. Served with mustard or ketchup for dipping, Spam fritters were especially popular for Friday lunches when Catholics couldn't eat meat. Technically, Spam qualified, but many families treated it as different enough from real meat to be acceptable. The oil used for frying got strained and saved for the next meal. Nothing was wasted. Workers would wrap cooled fritters in newspaper to eat cold at lunch, the fat having soaked through to create an oddly satisfying sandwich: peanut butter and pickle sandwich. It sounds bizarre today, but the peanut butter and pickle sandwich was a genuine Depression-era favorite. The combination actually makes sense when you think about it. Protein and fat from the peanut butter, acid and crunch from the pickles, all on filling bread. Peanut butter cost about 10 cents a jar and lasted weeks. Pickles were homemade from summer cucumbers, essentially free if you had a garden. The sandwich provided a complete lunch that didn't need refrigeration, perfect for workers and school children. The sweet-savory combination was surprisingly addictive. Some people used dill pickles, others bread and butter pickles. The key was slicing the pickles thin and laying them evenly so every bite had that crucial crunch. Advanced versions added a thin layer of mayonnaise or a sprinkle of paprika. The sandwich originated in lunch counters where creative cooks tried to make cheap ingredients more interesting, but it spread quickly through word of mouth. During the worst years of the Depression, when meat was a distant memory for many families, this sandwich provided variety and genuine satisfaction: peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich. Even stranger than pickles was the peanut butter and mayonnaise combination, but it was surprisingly popular across the South and Midwest. The mayonnaise added richness and moisture that made the peanut butter easier to eat, especially when the bread was dry and the peanut butter was the thick, separated kind that came in tins. During the Depression, both were pantry staples that didn't require refrigeration if used quickly. The combination provided substantial calories, crucial when people were doing hard physical labor on limited food. Some versions added lettuce when available, creating what they called a PB&M&L. Others included a slice of tomato or banana. But the basic version, just peanut butter and mayo on white bread, sustained millions. The fat from both spreads provided lasting energy, while the protein kept hunger at bay for hours. The combination might sound unappetizing, but the creamy, rich texture and subtle tang from the mayo actually complemented the peanut butter well. Bread and dripping. In households that occasionally had meat, the drippings were liquid gold. That rendered fat from bacon, beef, or pork got poured into jars and saved like treasure. Spread on bread with a generous sprinkle of salt and pepper, it made a lunch that was surprisingly satisfying. The fat provided essential calories that kept people warm during bitter winters. Different drippings had different flavors. Bacon was smokiest, beef was richest, pork was smoothest. Some families kept separate jars for each, choosing based on what would taste best that day. The bread would be toasted, if fuel permitted, otherwise eaten soft, the dripping melting slightly from the warmth of the kitchen. In summer, it stayed soft and soaked into the bread immediately. British families called it bread and drip, while German families knew it as schmaltzbread, when made with chicken fat. Onion sandwich. When there was literally nothing else, there was the onion sandwich. Slice a raw onion thick, put it between two pieces of buttered bread, add salt and pepper, and you had lunch. It sounds impossible that people ate this by choice, but during the worst of the Depression, onions were sometimes the only fresh vegetable available. They stored well, grew easily, and provided vitamin C when citrus was an impossible dream. The key was using sweet onions when possible, though yellow storage onions worked too. The butter, or margarine or lard, mellowed the bite of the raw onion. Some people added a splash of vinegar or a thin spread of mustard. The sandwich was actually refreshing in its own way, with a sharpness that woke up your palate and cleared your sinuses. Coal miners particularly favored onion sandwiches because the strong flavor cut through the coal dust taste in their mouths. Children would trade them at school, though usually only with other kids who also brought onion sandwiches. The smell was too strong for anyone else to sit nearby. Milk toast. Milk toast has become slang for something bland and weak, but during the Depression, it was comfort food that could extend precious milk and stale bread into a filling meal. You'd toast bread until golden, tear it into pieces in a bowl, then pour warm milk over it. Add salt, pepper, and a pat of butter, if you were fortunate. The milk soaked into the bread, creating a porridge-like consistency that was easy to eat and gentle on empty stomachs. Some versions used water mixed with canned milk to stretch it further. Others added a sprinkle of sugar and cinnamon for a sweeter version. The dish was especially popular for children and elderly people who had trouble with harder foods. During the worst of the Depression, when fresh milk was delivered in glass bottles and every drop was precious, mothers would use the milk that accumulated around the cream cap, slightly soured but still nutritious, for milk toast. It provided calcium, carbohydrates, and enough substance to get through an afternoon of work. Hospitals served milk toast to patients well into the 1960s, recognizing its digestive gentleness and nutritional completeness. Ketchup soup. When the cupboards were truly bare, there was ketchup soup, hot water mixed with ketchup packets saved from diners or the dregs of an almost empty bottle. It sounds like the depths of desperation, and it was, but it kept people alive. Restaurants and diners during the Depression often looked the other way when desperate people made tomato soup at their tables with free ketchup and hot water. Some places even left crackers out, knowing they'd be taken. The improvised soup provided some vitamins, a bit of sugar for energy, and most importantly, hot liquid that filled empty stomachs. Families at home would stretch their last bit of ketchup with hot water, adding whatever they had, a bouillon cube, dried herbs, even coffee grounds for color and depth. Children thought it was a treat, not knowing it meant there was literally nothing else to eat. The fact that people had to resort to ketchup soup speaks to the severity of the Depression, but also to human ingenuity and the determination to survive. Hoover stew. Named mockingly after President Herbert Hoover, who many blamed for the Depression, Hoover stew was what happened when government surplus food got combined in one pot. The basic ingredients were macaroni, canned tomatoes, hot dogs, and canned corn or beans, all items distributed through relief programs. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot, filling, and provided a reasonably balanced meal. Churches and soup kitchens served massive pots of Hoover stew, feeding hundreds with ingredients that cost pennies per serving. The recipe was infinitely adaptable. Add potatoes if you had them, onions if someone donated them, any vegetable that was about to spoil. The hot dogs were usually the cheapest variety, more filler than meat, but they added crucial flavor and a bit of protein. Families would make their own versions at home, children excited by the presence of hot dogs, even if they were cut so thin you could see through them. The stew actually tasted pretty good, especially when you were hungry. The combination of starch from the pasta, acidity from the tomatoes, and salt from the hot dogs created a satisfying meal that many people remember fondly, despite its origins in desperate times: red beans and rice. Red beans and rice was already a Monday tradition in New Orleans, wash day, when women needed something that could simmer unattended. But the Depression spread this economical dish across the South. A pound of red beans cost 4 cents, a pound of rice 3 cents, and together they created complete protein that could feed a family for days. The beans went on early with the holy trinity of onions, celery, and bell pepper if you had them, or just onions if you didn't. Add water, a ham bone that had been used multiple times, and let it simmer all day. The beans broke down into a creamy gravy that coated the rice perfectly. Some families added a bay leaf, others a dash of hot sauce. The dish was so filling that one bowl could sustain hard physical labor. Leftover rice got fried for breakfast, leftover beans became soup. Nothing was wasted. The tradition was so strong that even today, many New Orleans restaurants serve red beans and rice on Mondays, honoring both tradition and the memory of making do with less. The combination of beans and rice appeared in every culture hit by the Depression, proof that necessity really is the mother of good cooking. Thanks for joining us on this trip down memory lane. If you enjoyed exploring these 25 winter lunch traditions, give it a like and share it with someone who remembers. And don't forget to subscribe.